evening. I'm Carolyn Murray. For more than 200 years, Emanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston has been more than just a spiritual home for people of the AME faith. It has served as a place where people were trained to be soldiers in a lifelong battle for liberty and equality. This is a church that exists today despite many attempts to destroy the building and the people who worship here. Enslaved Africans who were threatened with arrest and death for worshiping, destruction by fire and then by earthquake, and the massacre of church members as they bow their heads in prayer. We work with members of Emanuel A.M.E. and historians to look at the 200-year history of the Emanuel A.M.E. Church. The African Methodist Episcopal denomination was established in Philadelphia in 1787 after an act of discrimination. White leaders and members of St. George's Methodist Episcopal Church actually grabbed the black church members off their knees as they were praying and removed them from the church. These ostracized members formed the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Eventually, African Methodism spread to South Carolina and the formation of the church that we know today as Emanuel A.M.E.
We've found it necessary, especially after the incident in June 2015, to sort of formalize the history of the church. And so we've started to talk about the formation of the church itself and how it was founded. Too often people don't know about it. They don't realize that within a few blocks of St. George's Methodist Church in Philadelphia, where Richard Allen was asked to leave the church, the founders of the country were writing the Constitution of the United States at the same time in 1787.
And those things should be connected.
Should be together, yeah. Mm-hmm. So we had, on the one hand, we're saying we're creating a country that is based on equality. In the meantime, around the corner, we have churches discriminating against its black members.
Black Methodists who simply wanted to worship were encountering racism, bigotry, and hatred. So following the leadership of a slave who bought his freedom, Richard Allen formed a new denomination, African Methodist Episcopal.
Founding bishop is a man by the name of Richard Allen. And Richard Allen was enslaved in the late 18th century in Delaware and in Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. And finally, he'll manage to buy his freedom in 1783, the end of the American Revolution. Essentially, that the country was born, the revolution was over with at that point. He'll establish a church in Philadelphia, and it was created really for two reasons. Richard Allen revolted against the kind of racial discrimination that was widely practiced among white Methodists. Allen also believed that black people ought to be able to control their own religious destiny. He'll create the church in the late 1780s, and the denomination extends eventually by 1817 to 1818 to Charleston. It's an anti-slavery abolitionist church. It's an independent African-American denomination run by black people, governed by black people, and now it exists in Charleston. The fact that it was created was a revolutionary act because most of the members were themselves slaves. The minister at that time here in Charleston was a man by the name of Morris Brown. Morris Brown was free. Morris Brown, the minister, as well as members, were jailed. Some were whipped. They were fined, all in an effort to undermine this church in Charleston because it represented a real threat to the institution of slavery.
The church was founded as the Hempstead Church on Reed and Hanover Streets around 1815 by African Americans who were former members of Charleston's three Methodist Episcopal churches. They bought land on what is now Calhoun Street. At the time, it was called Boundary Street.
They bought the land in 1865, and I don't remember off the top of my head what it cost, but it wasn't a lot of money. Mm-hmm. They bought the land, and in 1872 they built a building on it.
Newly freed African Americans were guarded by Citadel cadets on one side and the Charleston Harbor on the other.
It's a two-story wood frame building that was here. And that building, of course, was destroyed by the earthquake in 1886. And then they came back and built this building. Wow. I mean, just think about this building at that time.
It's unimaginable.
Yeah, just a few years after slavery.
Let's talk about the Denmark VC insurrection. And was he a member of the African church?
Yes, he was. He was not only a member, he was a class leader, which means that he was kind of a liaison between the minister and the membership. Denmark Vesey had started out his life as a slave. He became a free person, but a free black in the South was not a fully free person. One of the problems that really served as a catalyst for the Denmark Vesey conspiracy was that the church that Vesey was a member of and a leader in was being persecuted.
Because of the courage and commitment of leaders such as Richard Allen, Morris Brown, and Denmark Vesey, Emanuel A.M.E. survived and became the first African Methodist Episcopal Church in the southern United States.
The denomination it has always practiced the social gospel. The church was an anti-slavery church and did everything that it could to try to bring freedom to literal, physical freedom to people.
It has not always been easy to worship at Emanuel A.M.E. Church. There was a time enslaved Africans met secretly. Coming up right after the break, South Carolina government's restrictions on African Americans from worshiping. Emanuel A.M.E. Church has existed for more than 200 years. We spoke with two people who've been members of Emanuel combined for more than 100 years. They say the church is essential in the existence and survival of the African American community. William Black takes a lot of pride in showing the extended branches of his family tree.
My birthday is 7/17/25.
So you are nearly 93 years old. He and his late wife, Ruby Black, share their love and their life by having 16 children.
This is her son and her grand and her great-grand.
He was a good provider. He worked for many years at the Charleston cigar factory.
Because during the time when I went to the cigar factory, I was making about $21 a week.
And in the 1950s, it was the largest private employer in Charleston. Did that $21 a week seem like a lot of money to you?
No, it seemed like that was a lot of money during that time. $21 a week was a lot of money at that time. The cigar factory was the best thing going. Mm-hmm. That's so most everybody was working there.
Before he worked at the cigar factory, Black was called to duty, World War II.
Then they drafted me. And they sent me straight to California, so they were going to send me over to the Pacific. They dropped that big bomb over there, and they still ran it, so that what saved me, not unless I would have went over there too.
After 3 years in the Army, he returned home, met his bride, started their family, and they found a church.
And the first day I went to Emanuel, I fell in love with Emanuel Church.
And he wasn't alone.
Me and my wife. The next week she joined, and then the following week I joined. Both of us joined Emanuel Church. And during that time, my Emanuel Church, they had a good congregation. They used to have been crowded every Sunday.
The Emanuel A.M.E. congregation grew, and so did his role in the church, from trustee to steward to class leader.
Sometimes some of them in the hospital, you got to go to the hospital to see them and pray for them and lift them up, and that's a class leader. And used to have 2 services, 7 in the morning and 11 in the daytime. You had 2 services. Used to have 2 pre-service in the.
He was responsible for cleaning the church top to bottom. He did it for decades, no complaints.
And they can tell you, I keep them sparkling.
Sparkling, huh?
I keep them sparkling.
Emanuel A.M.E. is his home.
And I would be in Emmanuel until they ruled me out.
A few miles away, in a different part of Charleston,
I was a member of the Democratic Women. I served as the president of that group.
Doris Coxum Sanders remembers being a young girl at Emanuel A.M.E.
The church was also the center of our lives.
Now, at the age of 84, are there members of the church who currently attend Emanuel who you remember as childhood friends?
Oh, absolutely. There's several of them. We came up during the age when there was discrimination.
Buses, beaches, off limits to African Americans. These were times when the struggle for civil rights happened daily.
Lived in a place where we were surrounded by beaches and water, but we could not attend the beaches. We could not go to the beaches.
Sanders admits that as a child, despite the limitations, they found their own source of fun.
When we went to the theater, we had to sit upstairs. Of course, that was fun because we could throw things downstairs.
But inside the church, things were different.
That was the only place where our history was taught. We knew about the history of our church. We knew about the history of other famous African Americans, and so it was taught to us. We had a youth, a very active youth, and the church empowered us as young people.
From being a young girl and being made to go to church.
I remember that so well, walking to the service, not wanting to go all the time.
To her present day role as a leader in the congregation. Is that still something that takes your breath for a moment, that now you are someone who is considered a living legend in the church?
Oh, absolutely. And along with that comes a lot of wisdom and experience.
Talk about some of the programs you're involved with at Emanuel.
I sing in the choir. I have served as a steward. I have served as a trustee. I'm very actively involved in meetings. I now serve as chairman of the E.M.E. apartments, and those are houses that are subsidized to provide housing for people who need that assistance.
For a combined more than 100 years, William Black and Doris Coxum Sanders have devoted their lives to supporting Emanuel A.M.E. Church, their focus on family, friends, fellowship, and their faith.
When you can give back after God has blessed you so much, it's a wonderful feeling.
The A.M.E. faith, born out of the fight for freedom, has always been and remains today a place where families gather and gain strength. Coming up right after the break, we speak with 3 generations of Emanuel men who share a name and a devotion to the A.M.E. Church. They share a name, a love of family, respect for law, and a devotion to the A.M.E. faith. 3 generations of Martins at Emanuel A.M.E. Church. Dan Martin Sr., a retired circuit court judge. Danny Martin Jr. is a family court judge. And Daniel Martin III is in his last few months of law school. They have a lot in common, including their love of Emanuel A.M.E.
Dr. King was last time he was in Charleston.
Right.
That's about 6 months before he was assassinated.
He is a retired state representative for Charleston District 111.
This is a picture of Jesse and I.
And a retired South Carolina Circuit Court judge. Daniel E. Martin Sr. is a living book of history. And many of the lessons he has learned and passes on to others.
I went to A.M.E. College, Allen University, and I learned in depth the history of the African Methodist Episcopal Church.
We're through being a member of Emanuel A.M.E. Church.
I've been the attorney for Emanuel Church for about over 35 years until Danny Jr. Came along, and he picked up and carried on for a while.
Watching him on Morris Street, my father always had his own business as a lawyer. That business he'd put together, knowing where he had come from and how few opportunities he had growing up, but yet he was able to create his own business and do well. So I always admired him for that and was hoping that some of that would rub off on me.
It did. After more than 2 decades in private practice, Daniel E. Martin Jr. is a family court judge in Charleston County. Did you have a desire to be on the bench, to be a judge early in your career? Was that something you wanted to do?
No. No, I never thought about being a judge. It just kind of happened.
But there was never a question about his faith and where he would worship.
Around 3 years old, I would imagine that that's my first recollection of actually being in church.
And how did the church look to you at that time?
Huge. It was full of people. There was a lot of activity going on. I always looked at these people as being giants, not just in the church, but in the community. Some of the people who I knew were friends of my parents, they took on a whole different role in church. They may be a missionary or have some other role in the church. And everyone who was there were people that we had nothing but the highest respect for. Of course, I didn't know anything other than what I had been taught, so my wife and I, we passed that on to our children.
Daniel E. Martin III is following the well-worn Martin footsteps. So, Daniel, this is going to be your setup, do you think? This is going to be the place you call home soon, this law office?
That's definitely what he wants.
He is in his final months of law school at the University of South Carolina.
Special thing to know that, you have a strong legacy to uphold. A lot of people have strong legacies, but they aren't necessarily, ones that you feel like are in line to what you want to do. It's funny how a lot of our interests in things that we're passionate about really align.
A legacy of law, leadership, and love. There is no denying the Martin connection.
I'll sometimes be in a place where people would recognize me. They've never met me before, but they'll look at me and say, "You're Danny Martin's son." And now my son tells me the same thing happens to him.
Is it a special feeling for you, Daniel, when you are in church and you are standing alongside your family, but particularly your father and your grandfather?
Yes. That's one thing we can always look forward to every week, that, we know we'll all be, in one place in one setting. So be me, my sister, mom, dad, grandpa and grandma, cousin Debbie, all, that's just one time we all get together, and it's always a great feeling.
When you are in Emanuel, Danny, and your son and your father are in Emanuel, what is that feeling like for you?
It's a good feeling. It's a good feeling. We've had in my family a member in that church for at least 100 years. I was baptized in that church. Both my children were baptized in that church. My wife has been a member of that church for as long as we've been married. We look forward to Sundays.
How do you feel, Mr. Martin, when you are in church with your family, and particularly these two young men who are following your footsteps in a lot of ways?
Just to know that we all are there in service, it's a great feeling that we cherish every Sunday.
Music that puts sound to the suffering, longing, and religious passion of African Americans during slavery and its aftermath. Coming up after the break, the sweet-spirited sounds of the Emanuel A.M.E. Church Choir. Singing, clapping, drumming, it's the sound of Emanuel A.M.E. Church on a Sunday. For centuries, ministry through music has been another way for the message of hope and deliverance to be shared by African Americans in this historic A.M.E. Church.
Music helps sets the tone, so if the choir is singing something, it helps ignite the spirits. If the choir is doing their job, then those sitting in the congregation will feel it, and then eventually the pastor would help him to bring his sermon over. The Reverend Pinckney hired me. He called me. He said, "Brother Singleton?" I said, "Yes. I'd like to make an offer. You could become the minister of music with Emanuel." And he had this really deep voice. The Emanuel Mass Choir was formed about 5 years ago. It consists of all choir members in the church. We have 6 choirs. Most of them are been singing in choirs for years here, so it's kind of easy to deal with. And then plus I get to play, a 118-year-old pipe organ every Sunday, so that's a special treat.
I became a member around 1959, and I've been on the choir all of that time. I would think that next to the preacher, the choir renders the music that we hope somewhat touches the soul. I trust that I will be able to be with the choir for many more years, but it all depends upon the man upstairs.
My name is Mary Alice Mack. I'm a member of several choirs. It's the United Choir, the Combined Choir. I sing when the Jubileers sing. I sing when the Senior Choir sings. I just sing. I've been singing, like I said, ever since Sunbeam Choir days. We are very emotional. So, we clap and we shout and we move, and it just gets the feeling in you.
I remember the night he came in for rehearsal. I said, "Here?" And Mother Emanuel Pharrell came in, and this place went crazy. He came in on that Sunday, and we sang right in front of the church with him, and it was exciting. I've been at A.M.E. all my life, so that's all I know. I love it. This is a special place. So I feel honored and privileged to even serve in this capacity, be a part of history.
Walking into Emanuel A.M.E. Church, you notice the beauty, the pipe organ, original gas lamps, the towering stained glass windows. All have withstood the test of time because of the care and commitment from church members like Floyd and Felicia Breland. They were married here at Emanuel in 1959. That was 59 years ago. Their life and their love is based on their faith.
I wanted to go in the dining hall one day, and I decided I was going to cut in front of her. So I cut in front of her, and that's the beginning.
Retired South Carolina State Representative from District 111, Floyd Breland explained how he met his bride.
What did you think about this young man who was cutting in front of you at the dining hall?
He says he caught the attention of the talented co-ed from Charleston named Felicia.
Well, he was pretty nice, friendly, laughable and everything, so I let him cut the line.
On the campus of Allen University in Columbia, South Carolina.
We also were members of the Allen University Choir. So I found out he could sing, and I knew music. I played piano and organ by the time I went to Allen. So that music, I think, brought us closer together.
Allen University, named for Richard Allen, the founder of the African Methodist Episcopal faith. It is the first university in South Carolina founded by African Americans for the education of African Americans. Breland says there was tension outside of the campus but not at Allen.
How did it feel being a student on that campus in the early 1950s?
You had a lot of support then. The teachers, from the teachers on down to the ministers, whenever they would come on the campus, I think about it often now. They'd give you a quarter, because that's big money there.
Money was tight, but his mind was set on helping students like himself.
At Allen, my major was English. And I taught for a number of years here in Charleston and in Georgia, English.
Her passions were playing the piano and the organ, which eventually led to a lasting legacy. She wrote the alma mater for Columbus Street Elementary School in Charleston.
It was Columbus Street School at that time, and a brand new school, like I said. So we said we needed a school, so we needed an alma mater. So with my experience at Allen, I went on and did the school song.
Do you remember it?
Yes, some of it. We bow to honor thee, Columbus Street School.
Their love affair with education and Emanuel grew.
Christian, as some people call it now, baptized right here at this altar.
And family brought them to the altar at another time in their lives.
Lavanza was born in 1964.
Their son Lavanza would grow up to become a music lover like his parents and a member of Emanuel A.M.E. Church. The African Methodist Episcopal faith has always been a part of their lives.
I came up in the A.M.E. Church from St. George. That's where I used to come to church, because the church was right across the field from my house, so which was about half a block. So every Sunday morning, I would go to church, Sunday school, junior church, ACED. I went to church 5 times a day.
Mother Emanuel, at the heart of a love story that continues in faith and family. Throughout its long history, the members of the first AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina, used their faith to survive slavery and the wrath of nature. After the break, more on the history of Emanuel A.M.E. Herb Frazier, who's a journalist, lived 2 blocks from Emanuel A.M.E. Church in the 1950s and 60s. He says the story of Mother Emanuel's influence in America is more than a place of religious worship. It's a symbol of the struggle for people of African heritage in America. Did you feel the effects of segregation growing up?
I remember feelings of segregation was one when we rode the bus, the SCE&G bus, because at that time South Carolina Electric and Gas Company operated the buses. In the back of the bus, they had painted over the sign that colored had to sit in the rear of the bus. I remember seeing that. I remember asking my grandmother, why were there 4 water fountains in the Sears? And I do remember when I went to the Gloria Theater, when we went to the Gloria Theater, we had to sit up in the balcony. I was at an age that I didn't understand the dangers of racial tension. When we went to Atlantic Beach, I remember asking Daddy, I said, Daddy, there ain't no white people here. Do white people go to the beach? They should come to the beach and have a good time like us. But I don't ever hear him explaining the reason why there were no white people at the beach, all black people at the beach. So it was maybe because and I've reflected on this many times, maybe they wanted to shield me from that and just let me be a kid.
What was it like growing up in the shadow of Emanuel A.M.E. Church?
Well, I would come Sunday mornings for Sunday school. Many mornings I would cut hooky with my cousins, and we'd walk down King Street and walk to the Battery. But we would be back here by 11 o'clock for service. My grandmother was a very, very proud member of Emanuel. And she really, really loved the AME denominations. And I remember her talking about the bishops at that time in very revered terms. And I remember very consciously that she said, and she would wave her finger in the air, she said, when you go to college, she said, you're going to Allen University. You know, that was a given, you know, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And that's where I went to school the first year of my college experience.
Would you say, Herb, though, that some of your formation of eventually who you would become was shaped through your experiences here at Emanuel?
Oh, no doubt. There was definitely discipline. As I mentioned before, you know, there was these stories that, you know, the adults in this church, you know, they corrected you. And many times, if you were misbehaving or cutting up, as they say, Hilda Scott would come by and grab the earlobe or pinch you on that soft spot in the back of your arm, you know, and, you know, I can still feel the pain and the shock of her doing that.
Frazier is no longer an active member of Emanuel A.M.E. Church, but the horrific act of terrorism, the murder of 9 people during Bible study June 17, 2015, brought him back to his Emanuel roots. He collaborated on this book, We Are Charleston, with Dr. Bernard Powers and Marjorie Wentworth.
We started talking about it together. We said this would be a good way to try to explain why the shooter picked this church, because this church's history as a church rooted in an anti-slave environment and a church that was on the forefront of the civil rights movement. I could bring to bear some of my recollections of this church and the important people in this church and what this church meant to this community in Charleston and particularly this neighborhood. And then I said, well, you know, this would be a great way, too, to talk about the AME denomination, because a lot of people don't know what AME stands for.
What would you like people to know about your experience, whether as a child, growing up in this church, your experience through writing the book, or your personal observation?
People of African descent have had a huge impact on this city. And this church is one of the places of historic importance and relevance moving forward.
The African American Church is a place that was founded by people of African heritage seeking refuge and liberty. That also made it a target of white supremacists. Right after the break, members of the church talk about that night, the massacre at Mother Emanuel. June 17th, 2015. It was a Wednesday, and about a dozen people were at Bible study here at this beautiful historic church in downtown Charleston. That night, 9 people were murdered because they were black. It's a night that shook this world and shook this country, but it did not shake the faith of the people who believe in the meaning of the name Emanuel. God is with us.
I was not here for the Bible class. I was playing for the other church on Wednesday night. I had been here already with the senior citizens that same day. Susie and Ethel were here with me for the senior citizens that Wednesday. They stayed for Bible class. I left to prepare for a church service. I was blessed because I had selected to continue playing for the church, or else I would have been there.
Herb, tell me about the first call or the first bit of information you got about June 17th, 2015.
It was about 10 o'clock that night when my youngest daughter called me, and my youngest daughter said, Daddy, there's been a shooting at your church. I said, what are you talking about? A shooting at the church? And I think like so many people who have looked back on that moment when they heard about the shooting at the church, thought, oh, maybe it was just something outside the church. And we came down, came across the connector, came down Calhoun Street, and when we got closer, we could see the lights of the emergency vehicles. And it was heartbreaking.
My daughter, one lived in Goose Creek, she called me 1 o'clock that day. And she said, "Daddy," I said, "Huh?" She said, "I'm coming downtown, so I want to talk with you." So I thought she was going to come and talk a little while and go back. She talked with me she get there about 1:30, from 1:30 until 8 o'clock that night. So I said, well, I'll stay home. And about 10 o'clock, my oldest daughter, who lived up in North Charleston, she called me. She said, "Daddy," and I answered the phone and I said, "Yeah." She hollered, "Oh, God, thank you. Oh, Father, thank you." I said, "What's going on?" But China Emanuel Church is blessed.
Sing praise.
We're really blessed. Because God always brings us out.
June 17, 2015 is an event that changed my life forever. To think that 9 innocent people could be murdered on such a sacred ground just punched me in my gut. Those people were my friends. And then when I heard the word forgiveness, I knew that was the answer to my question, where was God in the midst of this crisis? Because he was right there with us. We don't live a life that's not that's absence of tragedy. That tragedy will come, but they prepare us how to deal with them when they do come to us.
There are an estimated 3.5 million members of the African Methodist Episcopal faith in this country. Each church part of a larger connection, and a key part of the connection is the minister. Right after the break, we hear from the pastor of Emanuel A.M.E, who talks about the message of education, liberty, and freedom. Plans for the memorial and garden honoring the Emanuel 9 have been revealed. The memorial will border Emanuel A.M.E Church in Charleston. It will feature a fountain engraved with the names of the 9 people who were shot to death while praying during Bible study. The memorial will also include a place for prayer and reflection and a survivor's garden, honoring the 5 people who were in the church that night and survived the massacre. The designer of the memorial is Michael Arad. He also designed the 9/11 memorial in New York City. He is not the message, but he is the minister, and his job is to shine a light and share the AME mission. Let's talk about the history of the church, its strong history, not only to this community, but really to the world and to the faith community.
At times during the week, they would maybe be a house servant, but they would never have their own. But when they came to the church, they were able to be leaders. They were able to articulate how they want things to be ran.
This was one of the places, other than home, where people felt safe.
Carolyn, is when you reflect upon this particular house of God, this particular place, when everyone would come and they would feel safe, and then June 17th happens. It was safe for us. It was that place that we would come and seek refuge. And I remember one of the first Bible studies that we had when we shared with the congregants and we asked the question, well, what do you do when evil happens?